My first up-close and personal experience with intimate partner violence was in the 10th grade when a middle school friend's mother and brother were murdered by her mom's ex-boyfriend. The 15-year-old was even shot while escaping through a window while carrying her infant sister to safety because the gunman intended to kill them all that night. When police arrived on the scene, the murderer, Scott Davis, screamed, "I shot them, I did it, and I'll do it again." Only when he faced death penalty charges did he apologize while accepting a plea deal. My friend, a bubbly and vivacious girl with her whole life in front of her, then had to face that life without her family. At 18, when speaking at the life sentencing of her mother's murderer, she said, "I don't understand how someone could destroy somebody's life like this. It's something that will haunt me for the rest of my life." Her mother had attempted to get the boyfriend drug treatment and domestic violence counseling to no avail. When she asked him to move out, he agreed. But instead of leaving, he made a deadly decision. Years later, when an ex-boyfriend woke me from my sleep with his hands around my neck, attempting to crush my windpipe in a rage, I thought of my friend and her mother. Before diving into this video, I want to make something clear before anyone attempts to lead a deflective argument in the comments. Intimate partner violence is not limited to any race, country, gender, or sexual orientation. It has been a long-running feature of patriarchal society in numerous civilizations and cultures, not just during the 244 years of official American existence. At least 4 million American women a year of all races are abused by their partners, and this includes homosexual relationships. In fact, women in these relationships grapple with their own unique experiences of psychological aggression, gender role posturing, and mutual violence that must be addressed on a wide scale by someone in that community. Additionally, it was reported that 1 in 5 men experience intimate partner violence in America in 2016, and a global look at intimate partner violence shows that the problem is widespread and not based in America. In South Korea, where gender inequality didn't begin being addressed until the late 80s, and the legal status of patrilineal succession was not struck down until 2005, domestic violence is rampant. 1 out of 6 couples has experienced more than one episode of physical abuse, which is culturally seen as a private matter that most do not want police intervention on. In fact, the country is seeing a rise in anti-feminism and misogynistic incel culture. If you want content discussing the intimate partner abuse of anybody but Black American women, there is information out there to explore, and they are important because, as we will learn, intimate partner violence is different among groups. Those issues are valid, but they are not the subject at hand. This video is dedicated to my friend and her mother, the Black women I've known growing up who were beaten or nearly killed, impregnated without their consent, the Black women who dared to fight back and were imprisoned, and the Black women dragged and maligned today by their own community for daring to speak up. This video is about Black women, intimate partner violence in heterosexual relationships, and the celebrity culture that simultaneously encourages and ignores it. In America, approximately 3 women are killed by a spouse, lover, or partner every day. In recent years, 53% of these women are Black. In fact, Black women are 4 times more likely than their white peers to be murdered by a lover and 7 times more likely to be killed when pregnant than white women. To make matters worse, 9 out of 10 murdered Black women were killed by a man they knew. When we broaden the scope of intimate partner violence to include reported rapes and physical abuse by a woman's partner, at least 40% of Black women have had these experiences, making them the group most likely to be abused by a partner. But now it's time for an in-depth, updated version inspired by the disgusting yet unsurprising support of Tory Lanez, the man who shot Meg Thee Stallion, by DaBaby, a man from my hometown rumored to be physically abusive as well as being caught on camera assaulting women, as well as allegedly smirking at the family of the man he killed in court. In this episode of Celebrity, we'll be discussing how and why straight Black women are so often conditioned to ride or die, and why hip-hop and the culture must be at the forefront of obliterating systemic abuse. But before we talk about misogynistic celebrities, we need to take it back a few centuries. Why? Because the hatred of Black women does not start or end with insecure rappers, actors, and athletes. A popular 1962 Motown song, "He Hit Me and It Felt Like a Kiss," exemplifies the long-reaching pervasiveness of domestic violence in black culture. The song was written by Carole King and Jerry Goffin after finding out their babysitter was routinely beaten by her boyfriend and that the woman, singer Little Eva, justified the violence as his love for her. Little Eva sang this song you've probably heard of, "Locomotion." Then there was David Ruffin, lead singer of The Temptations, who abused singer Tammy Terrell and even hit her with a motorcycle helmet. Perhaps most notoriously, there was Ike and Tina Turner, whose tumultuous relationship has been parodied and joked about in numerous songs and TV shows. Ike said in 1999, "Sure, I slapped Tina. We had fights, and there have been times when I punched her to the ground without thinking. But I never beat her." But of course, the violence, and our tolerance of it, reaches back further than that. Nothing set the tone for the treatment of black women in this country quite like the treatment of black women during slavery. They were raped and beaten by masters while prized and praised for their abilities to cook, clean, work, and push out children. It was common for black men, also beaten and dehumanized while being barred from traditional notions of masculinity, land ownership, legal marriage, freedom, etc., to take on the values of their oppressors and attempt to exhibit control over what they could in their lives, like black women. While there was a core of black men committed to the love and safety of their counterparts, the portion that coveted white women while disparaging black women didn't go away after slavery. The late 19th century is lightly peppered with court cases or instances of rape or attempted rape of black women by black men, usually dismissed or with no resulting punishment for the accused. States had rewritten their rape laws after the Civil War to be race neutral, but this wasn't beneficial to black women. As detailed by Diane Miller Somerville in Rape and Race in the 19th century South, white men on juries and as judges sympathized with black men accused of rape of black women because they were being unfairly held accountable under alien rules of sexual and moral conduct. This worked doubly. Black men were stereotyped as too beastly to adhere to sexual morality, and black women were stereotyped as too lascivious to be victims. The officiated experiences of 19th century black women who went to court against their rapists were the exceptions, not the rule. Historically, black women were expected to be strong and resilient in their communities, to put race first, and to protect black men, as they were already stereotyped to be violent. Instead of getting police involved or running away with money they didn't have, black women often faced abusers themselves, explaining why black women murdered male partners in the first half of the century at comparable rates to black men murdering their partners. Think of all those hot grits and middle of the night knife at the throat stories about battered women who finally had enough.
Bring him into the kitchen and get you a big old pot of hot grits. And when it start to boil like lava after he done got good and comfortable, you say, "Good morning." Throw it right on him.
As one black woman noted in 1904, "On one hand, we are assailed by white men, and on the other hand, we are assailed by black men, who should be our natural protectors." A study of murder data from Italian, German, and black Chicagoans between 1875 and 1920 demonstrates this historical reality. During this period, the proportion of domestic homicides among all groups doubled. The family was changing. More white women entered the workforce, and new trends and ideas about dating, marriage, and gender roles in the rapidly urbanizing country caused tension. Basically, more men were employing domestic abuse as a strategy of patriarchal power. But this abuse varied among racial groups. Among German Chicagoans who had been in the area for a long period of time and had established roots and wealth, most of the domestic homicide involved men in their 30s murdering their entire families and themselves, usually a reaction to a falling social or economic status or women's threats to leave or divorce them. This group was the most likely to kill their own children. Italian Chicagoans, who were poorer, younger, and more recently settled than Germans, had a homicide rate 4 times the level of Chicago overall, and 10 times the German homicide rate. But Italians were the least likely group to kill women, instead disproportionately murdering brothers, fathers, brothers-in-law, and fathers-in-law. Among Italians, the important concept of family honor, along with expectations of manliness and silence, or omerta, to protect women, converged. emerged. While financial issues contributed, many murders were the result of a woman's male relative ending the life of someone who had beaten her, cheated on her, or otherwise affronted her, and therefore the family. Last but not least, Black Chicagoans. They were the poorest and most recently settled, and their homicide rate was 5 times larger than the city of Chicago overall, the only group higher than the Italians. While they were critiqued in newspapers for street violence and brawls, most black-on-black violence actually occurred within the home. Black people had the highest family homicide rate, double the rate of Italians, and 6 times the rate of Chicago overall. Black people were the least likely to kill their own children, with instead spouses and lovers making up more than 4/5 of the family homicide victims. Black men, especially those who had witnessed violence growing up, often took their daily frustrations out on their women, sometimes culminating in death. Among all groups, for most of the cases in which a woman killed a man, it was after unsuccessful attempts to secure legal protection. Described one Belle Benson in 1918, "Don't look for Jim, I just killed him, because he started to beat me again and I shot him." Another woman, 23-year-old Minnie Smith, went on record after killing her husband of 2 years that she originally filed a complaint with police about his abuse and had him arrested. The court dismissed the case, leading to Minnie finding him when he was released and shooting him 3 times. She explained, "He had always said if I ever had him arrested, he would kill me, and I know he would do it. So I shot him, and then I shot him some more." This pattern of abuse, followed by a self-defense killing, continued well into the 20th century, but began to taper off in the 80s. In 1980, 13% of black male murder victims were killed by a partner, and has since dropped to 5%. But the treatment of modern black women who decide to take on their abusers is something we'll return to later. Black women in abusive relationships are more likely to remain in abusive relationships longer than white women. Why? The awful statistics about violence against black women doesn't prove that black men, who black women are most likely to date, are more violent than white ones, but instead speak to the unique race, class, and gender-based disadvantages black women face, especially their lack of economic resources. This problem is multi-layered, and anyone ignoring these layers will hinder the fight to end domestic violence more than help it. Anyone claiming it's purely a leftover of slavery is as lost as anyone claiming that black men are simply more violent than white men. The first layer is structural. Black people have been exposed to racial and gender oppression on an intergenerational level, and as mentioned before, these are things that have existed before violent hip-hoppers and modern black people. Women have traditionally been mistreated and subjugated throughout world history, making it one of the biggest structural barriers to ending intimate partner violence because it taints literally everything. Because women have often been seen as property or the status symbol of a man, it's not surprising that these ideas apply more loosely in modern dating. Think, if I can't have her, nobody will. On the racial front, there have been educational, employment, and economic inequalities at a systemic level that also taints everything, like having enough money to leave an abuser, having access to quality homeless shelters and jobs, to brazen corruption in law enforcement. Speaking of law enforcement, from a historical perspective, most black women have been reluctant to call the police on abusers, as police are corrupt, violent, and often ineffective in deterring intimate partner violence, with many being abusers in their own families as well. Data suggests that cops commit acts of domestic violence against spouses and children at up to 15 times that of the general population. The criminal justice system, tainted by racism and misogyny, makes speaking up against an abuser a dangerous gamble. In the case of Minnie Smith, even when she got her abuser arrested, he was not kept from harming her and was even let out. This still happens. And what about violence, a structural issue throughout humanity's existence? From public beatings of enslaved people at the whipping post to church-sanctioned child beatings, the structural violence of those who are molded to be subservient has been a recurring theme in our community. Black boys and girls often face unfathomable levels of physical and sexual violence, and often don't have anyone to turn to for healing. For boys, the inequalities and violence converge with expectations of manhood in a patriarchal society, another structural issue. To often make men with a lack of resources and a lack of success in a white man's world more susceptible to the generic stereotypes black men are socialized to embrace. And this is where we enter the cultural layer. Numerous scholars have discussed the commonality of poor, neglected, and/or dehumanized black boys falling into a certain persona for self-esteem and protection. This persona involves toughness, not showing emotions, wielding an exploitative attitude towards women, and/or resorting to violence to settle disputes. Per a University of Maryland paper on black intimate partner violence, as a result of their idleness and frustration, these men are often prone to seek status and to organize their lives around involvement in chronic drinking, drug use, drug selling, other illegal activities, chasing women, and partying. These are coincidentally the primary themes of modern hip-hop. Let's not play coy here. Structural issues like patriarchy, poverty, and racism exacerbate the gangster and pimp personas, but these personas are also baked into black culture at this point.
You tell her what you want her to do. If she say no, hit the bitch. Simple.
But I couldn't hit Sarah. I couldn't hit any woman.
Has not hitting the bitch been working? I mean, scientifically speaking, has not hitting the bitch achieved the desired result?
From blues lyrics to modern hip-hop, domestic violence has been satirized, downplayed, joked about, or ignored. The dehumanization of black men in media as violent creatures incapable of reason, thought, or self-control with insatiable sexual lust has endured since slavery. The dehumanization of black women in media as creatures who are either good, obedient mommy figures or whores undeserving of respect has been recurring from the days of Jim Crow to modern piss-poor observations made by everyone from rappers to teenage TikTokers to struggling podcasters looking for a viral moment.
Today the question is, which do y'all prefer, black or white females?
Oh, bro. I gotta rock with them Caucasians. I'm not gonna lie. They get it done for me.
For sure.
Both y'all?
Yeah.
In and outside of the black community, black women are stereotyped as angry and/or lascivious, making them less credible victims in the eyes of law enforcement and others. The structural stigma against single unmarried women and the cultural stigma against hoes, body counts, and soul ties can make the thought of being alone especially troubling for black women raised to measure their value by their relationship to men. Have you been picked? Do you have a man?
Can I go about getting his attention without seeming crazy and desperate?
You have plans with your boyfriend?
I have a boyfriend.
Okay, so when you get one, no, but when you get one.
So with dating as hard as it is out here, dealing with unsavory behavior for relationship status or marital security is a tale as old as time. Additionally, there's a cultural expectation for black women to stand 10 toes down for her community and not send another black man to jail. A black woman who decides enough can run the risk of being accused of betraying her partner and her race. The structural issue of mass incarceration therefore makes the issue of race loyalty culturally relevant. This is especially true in the hood, where police brutality, mass incarceration, and domestic violence are most prevalent. Intimate partner violence happens to black people of all class statuses, but it's a unique situation for the impoverished. The hood, a result of racist redlining, has no snitching attitudes, bolstered by hip-hop culture that makes victims of domestic violence socially isolated, along with having less access to domestic violence resources. Another cultural component is the higher tendency of egalitarian relationships in the black community, again a result of structural racism and sexism. Black women have usually worked outside the home, and black men historically have been lynched, kidnapped for chain gangs, required to migrate for seasonal jobs, and arrested for petty or survival crimes that have led to mass incarceration, meaning black women have usually been more independent and heads of households than white women. Sometimes black men, harder pressed to find employment than their white and female counterparts, have had to rely on their woman's money, which some scholars refer to as a sense of subordinated masculinity. The black independent woman is at odds with the gender expectations many black men have for themselves in a white male patriarchal dominated society, explaining why some, particularly those who have witnessed intimate partner violence themselves as children, are violent towards the women they date. Another class-based reality for black women in domestic violence situations, the possibility of calling the police on an abuser, violating a nuisance law, and getting kicked out by landlords. These laws exist in various towns, especially in areas where there's a lot of low-income housing. When you add in the other economic disadvantages like the overall white-black wealth gap, the fact that black women are 2 times more likely to be poor than white women, and severe lack of community resources in the impoverished impoverished areas so frequently inhabited by Black women. These factors lead to a lack of income and opportunities that makes it harder for Black women to escape abusive situations, especially when they are poor or have kids. Speaking of kids, reproductive coercion is a major concern for abused women of all races. This is when a partner manipulates the relationship by pressuring pregnancy or sabotaging birth control. One study found that 66% of teen mothers on public assistance who went through intimate partner violence had their birth control sabotaged. All of this leads to women being more dependent on fathers and informal faith-based support. Speaking of faith-based support, yet another cultural component is the Black church, which has directly and indirectly sanctioned the subservience of Black women in multiple ways. Old heads and fundamentalists point to Ephesians 5:22 to 5:28 and other interpretations of the Bible that make women subservient. Also, the church's long history has been traditionally dominated by men, meaning women's issues and concerns were often deprioritized. That's tragic because Black women are the most religious group in the country, and years of internalized sermons and advice that a good woman uplifts her man, the one bestowed upon her by God, and sticks by him is all too common. Out of all abused women, Black women are the most likely to turn to their faith, religion, and faith community for support. Hopefully, the continued rise and fight for Black women in leadership roles in the Black church will change some things. The last layer is situational. The who's, what's, where's, when's, and why's of domestic violence incidents that make each case different. Alcohol and drugs are often a part of these incidents, or somebody accused of cheating, or somebody actually cheating. Time and place also plays a role, with women most likely to be attacked between 6 p.m. and midnight, and 3 out of 4 at or near their own homes. I can already hear the fingers going at the keyboards right now, but none of the things I've mentioned are a call to coddle abusive Black men or demonize the good ones. Can we rewind that and say it again? None of the things I've mentioned are a call to coddle abusive Black men or demonize the good ones. Intimate partner violence can be broadly categorized, with most data showing that economically disenfranchised Black men are the most likely to hurt Black women, showing the need for poverty, racism, and misogyny to be eradicated. These structural, cultural, and situational layers often go ignored or pushed to the wayside in divisive arguments that ultimately help nobody. It's part of the reason why Black women committed to divesting think violence against Black women would disappear if they simply date white men. I don't need to list out the number of white terrorists, serial killers, and family annihilators to make my point that divester women have been structurally indoctrinated into believing white men are superior to and less violent than Black men, because it should be obvious. But that's not my only complaint. I've got smoke for everyone. Pro-Black men invested in positive representations of the Black community would rather sweep the brutal treatment of Black women under the rug, because instead of demanding individual accountability, they would rather use the structural and cultural issues as a crutch. And sometimes when these structural, cultural, and situational layers are addressed, they seem to obscure the personal trauma and situations of Black women as blips on the screen in a systemic issue, not holding them up as individual experiences. Take prison abolitionists who don't believe in incarcerating or executing abusers and murderers of women. They acknowledge the changes that need to happen to make the system more equitable and intimate partner violence obsolete. But sometimes their casual write-offs as women who challenge abolitionist ideology as carceral feminists who simply don't understand or who are committed to harm rather than being committed to their own fucking survival is tone deaf. This is something I've experienced, and partly why I don't consider myself a prison abolitionist. They are not reaching, and perhaps will never reach, mainstream support because of a reluctance to validate the concerns of Black women who challenge prison abolition as much as Black women who champion it. Aaron Glee Jr. was arrested in May 2020 for flying into a rage and kicking a woman in the stomach when she refused his sexual advances. He bonded out of jail on June 1st, just 5 days before he kidnapped and raped a homeless Oluwatoyin Salau for days before murdering her in August 2020. He had a history of assaulting women for 3 decades. Also, Also that month, the Massachusetts Bail Fund posted $15,000 to bail out a twice convicted rapist named Sean McClinton. 3 weeks after walking free, he allegedly kidnapped, beat, and raped a woman. He in no way represents the masses of people in prison for non-violent and/or survival crimes who don't have enough money for bail, but he is a lightning rod for ongoing arguments about how to deal with the violent and sexually depraved. Let me be clear, prisons should not dehumanize people and exacerbate violence. Decarceration, or reducing the amount of people sent to prisons, especially for crimes that should not actually be crimes, is crucial. But convicted sexual offenders should not be in the general public, and this falls on our legal system as well as the public. When abolition by any means necessary means that bail funds should be used on men jailed for stalking, abuse, rape, or murder, or that restorative justice is the solution for, say, a man who murdered his ex and set his children on fire, it's not rocket science to see why intimate partner violence, law enforcement reform, and discourse about abolition will continue to divide Black Americans in the years to come. In recent times, the leading cause of death among Black girls aged 1 through 19 after unintentional injuries is homicide, with 15.5% of deaths being a murder. For Black women ages 20 through 44, homicide is the fourth leading cause, comprising 7% of deaths. To put domestic homicide of Black women further into perspective, think of it like this. Police killed 1,165 people in 2018. 26.7%, or 215, of those people were Black. That's fucking despicable and rightfully a key concern of the Black community. Now, in 2016, 517 Black women were murdered by a man, with 91%, or 470, murdered by someone they knew. Of those women, 272 were murdered by a husband, boyfriend, or ex. In the wake of a global pandemic that is keeping abused women trapped at home with economically downtrodden partners, future statistics from this era will be just as heartbreaking. These problems demand equal attention. Neither can be swept under the rug by white racists who claim America is a free and just place for all, or by Black nationalists who demand women to put race over gender first. The average Black female homicide victim is 34 years old, but intimate violence against Black girls begins much earlier. A great source for nuanced information on intimate partner violence among teens is Jody Miller's Getting Played. It's quite common for Black teen girls to experience hair pulling, slapping, grabbing, public acts of embarrassment like being thrown into pools or having hair snatched off, along with other more violent forms of harassment and sexual assault like groping. Think of all the viral videos you've seen of Black girls being humiliated or assaulted by their peers for laughs. So what has been done to combat intimate partner violence, and has any of it been helpful? In 1994, Congress passed the Violence Against Women Act as part of the infamous Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. It established a federal office on violence against women in the Department of Justice, created the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and increased money for shelters and services designed to protect battered women. This was after a couple of decades of organizing, but it wasn't a true solution. The battered women's movement rose to prominence in the 70s after years of federal and local negligence that allowed the abuse of women who were often punished for defending themselves. The battered women's movement, often led by white feminists, perpetuated the belief that all domestic violence victims experienced it the same way, ignoring race, class, and gender differences. Secondly, this movement believed that domestic violence needed to be brought out of the private space of the home, where it had grown unchecked for centuries, into the public space of state jurisdiction and law enforcement. In doing so, it failed to account for the fact that the state is a perpetuator of violence in many women's lives, like the state-sanctioned sterilization and police brutality historically inflicted on Black women. As the battered women's movement professionalized and became more mainstream with support from federal dollars, the pressure to separate ideal female victims from undeserving, problematic, and untrustworthy women grew. There also needed to be a financial incentive. The key to getting funding to fight domestic violence in the 80s with the conservative, family values obsessed, anti-divorce Reagan administration was by emphasizing the criminalization of domestic violence. More money was spent on research and policy efforts that treated domestic violence as a crime, not as a component of the structural issues we discussed earlier. Whether you believe domestic violence should be rewarded with punishment or resources and understanding, you can agree that the racist, sexist, and greedy government absolving itself of its role in perpetuating the inequalities and circumstances that make domestic violence widespread is preposterous. Additionally, the emphasis on criminalizing domestic violence marginalizes battered women who themselves participate in illegal activity. You know, undocumented women, drug users or sellers, sex workers, and those fighting back against their abusers, things that shouldn't be crimes. So the fact that the Violence Against Women Act was embedded into legislation that did nothing to address the systemic poverty and racism that exacerbates domestic violence and other survival crimes is just the sick fucking world we live in. So in addition to the criminalization of domestic violence in the 90s, domestic violence was increasingly linked to welfare, something conservatives already wanted to dismantle. This is important because it instead should have been linked to poverty, something that conservatives and liberals alike had no desire to dismantle. But nope, moving women from welfare to work became the priority, especially with the addition of the family violence option to the disastrous Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, which amended New Deal welfare legislation to be less functional and more discriminatory in the allocation of funds, something I discuss in this video. The family violence option was an amendment that would put victims into a special category, making aid somewhat more accessible. Victims' advocates argued that women wanted to survive and work, and that welfare was a special last resort that needed to always be available. After a near unanimous vote in Congress, the amendment was added as a state option, but not federal law. By 2004, 41 states and DC had adopted the family violence option. The rub is that abused women seeking aid under this option aren't always seen as deserving or even as victims. There's been racial discrimination in the granting of FVO waivers, with information about the FVO more likely to be withheld from Black women. Because the option is state adopted, the flexible interpretation of the law means localities with higher concentrations of women of color have higher evidentiary standards for abuse. And again, those structural and cultural layers rear their ugly heads, regulating unrespectable, loud, proud, or otherwise unworthy poor Black women to standards based on budgets and bias. By the early 2000s, there was a rise in literature and scholars demanding an intersectional analysis of domestic violence that challenged previous assumptions. Amid findings that abuse in Black communities is most common among young and unemployed urban residents, poverty became a central issue. Other research has delved into victims themselves, revealing, for instance, that Black and white girls who are sexually abused or molested are at a higher vulnerability to being in a violent, intimate partner relationship as adults. And more frequently, research has asserted that domestic violence against children, aka child beatings and whoopings, is linked to intimate partner violence in adulthood. Another interesting facet of intimate partner homicides is the prevalence of handguns, a fixture of American culture. Most Black female victims are killed with handguns, and one study found that victims of all races are 5 times more likely to be killed by an armed abuser than an unarmed one. It's no surprise that in 2019, when Congress tried to add an amendment to the Violence Against Women Act, barring domestic abusers from owning guns, the NRA lobbied against it. Under the law at the time, those convicted of domestic abuse can lose their guns if they are or were formerly married to their victim, live with their victim, have a child with their victim, or are a parent or guardian of their victim. But the new provision would extend those who can be convicted of domestic abuse to include stalkers and current or former boyfriends or dating partners, and this passed in spring of 2021. The addition of stalkers to the legislation shows the changing attitudes towards how femicide happens. Think about how restraining orders taken out by women of all races routinely go unenforced by police or ignored by violent abusers hell-bent on causing harm. While this is a national problem, it also varies across regions, with local customs and attitudes, like the Black cultural issues discussed earlier, serving as barriers. For example, in 2017, Mississippi State Representative Andy Gibson blocked legislation that would establish domestic violence as grounds for a divorce, saying, "We need to have policies that strengthen the marriage. If a person is abusive, they need to have a change in behavior and a change of heart." People were outraged, so he backtracked and pushed a bill that would give women the ability to cite domestic violence as a reason to end a marriage, but did not establish domestic violence as a grounds for divorce. Ultimately, Mississippi passed a version of the law that allowed domestic abuse to be a grounds for divorce, and just 1 year later, over 600 divorces were filed on that basis. The fact that this wasn't possible until 2017 is insane, especially considering with the facts that poverty is high in Mississippi and that there is one abortion clinic, showing the difficulties abused black women face in that state. But what happens when a woman is in imminent danger or a divorce does not bring safety? There's the infamous case of Centoya Brown, a woman who was sentenced to 51 years in prison after shooting the man who kidnapped her at 16. But there are even more stories that get less attention. Sometimes black women don't even have to actually kill their partners to be jailed, like in the case of Marissa Alexander. In 2010, just 9 days after giving birth, her abusive husband attacked her. She fired a warning shot with a gun she was registered to own and ended up being found guilty of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in Florida, a state known for its notorious stand your ground self-defense law. Her husband even testified in court that he had been abusive towards her and most of the women in his life to no avail. Marissa was sentenced to 20 years because the judge and jury said she didn't appear afraid for her life. The sentence was later overturned after 5 years of incarceration and house arrest, demonstrating that stereotypes about black women continue to haunt us today. So at federal and state levels, black victims of intimate partner violence are often failed. And what of the culture? Early reactions to mainstream attempts to discuss violence in the black community are the kinds of attitudes I'm familiar with as a child of the 90s. Alice Walker's The Color Purple and the eventual movie debuted in the 80s to hella controversy, even more than what was given to 1977's For Colored Girls.
What I'm gonna do about Sophia?
Beat her.
In February 1986, Ebony magazine published a skeptical piece on the film and book, hinting that it may be a bad look for the community. Ironically enough, in the same issue with the not yet exposed rapist Bill Cosby on the cover. According to author Jacqueline Bobo, who interviewed various black women in the late 80s about their thoughts on the film, some found it to be unrealistic, saying the depictions of intimate partner violence were too soft. One said, "They'll beat you up, black both your eyes, and then go get right in the bed and go to sleep." Another one chimed in about the backlash to the film, "Where was all this hue and cry when the blaxploitation films came out?" These attitudes were reflected in letters to Ebony about their coverage of the film, though not all saw the merit of it. Wrote one man to Ebony after viewing the movie, "I am less saddened by the film The Color Purple than I am by the distorted perceptions that so many will walk away with after the credits roll. As an African American male, I know that I am not the insatiable, vapid, and senselessly cruel creature whose every move is predicated upon fulfilling chronic sexual desires, but white viewers make no such distinction." This sentiment was echoed by others who felt that the piece of historical fiction put all black men into a bad light by painting them all as abusive. Writer and TV host Tony Brown wrote that the film was the most racist depiction of black men since the birth of the nation, and the most anti-black family film of the modern film era. Did he have a point in targeting the film? Was Alice Walker's imagining of a not-so-distant past where black women faced abuse at the hands of black men a complete fantasy? And at the very least, if it wasn't a fantasy, was it a relevant reality to the black community in the 80s and beyond? Well, seeing how most acts of domestic violence go unreported, we have to look at the rates of the intimate violence cases that are so extreme that they are officially documented. I'm of course talking about domestic homicide. Between 1980 and 1995, the number of domestic homicides that were black female victims dropped from 43% to 33%. Decrease or increase, the numbers reveal black women, especially lower income ones, face danger at home. The proof that we didn't address it properly? By 2008, that percentage was again up to 43%. And by 2019, that number was the ugly aforementioned 53%. These are things we must address honestly as a community without accusations of trying to bring down black men or legitimize voyeuristic white fears. As As the Celebrity series continues to demonstrate, celebrities are only growing in importance. They shape society and they reflect society. When rap lyrics or comedians joke about killing lovers or wives in the face of the long history and daunting statistics, what is the end game? When rappers, athletes, and entertainers are allowed to succeed despite clear evidence of domestic abuse, instead of bringing up violent white entertainers or dragging critics as enemies of the black community, why can't we talk about it? Amid the rise of black women and children caught in gun crossfire, like in places like Philadelphia, at what point do we question violence of all kinds? When DaBaby brought out Tory Lanez, the man who shot Meg Thee Stallion at Rolling Loud, the same festival that allowed alleged abuser Lil Uzi Vert, alleged sex trafficker Blueface, and convicted rapist and woman beater Kodak Black to perform, I'm sure he never thought in a million years that he would be canceled and kicked off the roster of several festivals. Not because he brought out the man who shot his estranged collaborator moments after she performed, throwing a restraining order into possible violation and serving as a metaphorical slap in the face, but instead because he made homophobic remarks and doubled down on them. While I'm glad that DaBaby is facing consequences for his maliciousness, the incident showed that violence against women, particularly black ones, is not enough to render a celebrity undesirable. In the mainstream, black celebrities are canceled sooner for anti-Semitism and homophobia or transphobia against white people than for violence against women. In the culture, black celebrities are canceled sooner for snitching or allegedly showing feet in racial chat rooms than for cold-blooded murder or violence against women. Clearly, this is as much an American problem as it is a black community problem. In recent years, intimate partner violence has become more taboo, but we still have a long way to go. A community that treats the art of an abuser as more important than the abused is doomed.